Eleanor's flesh blistered against the iron cage, where townspeople charged pennies to gawk at the giant witch they'd condemned to burn. The Apache trader who paid for her freedom with his entire season's work saw not a monster to fear, but a woman whose towering strength matched her 6'4" frame. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Beneath a sky painted in shades of ember and gold, the silhouette of Eleanor Blackwood cut an unmistakable figure against the dusty horizon of Copper Creek. Standing at 6 feet and 4 inches tall, she moved with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to ducking beneath doorframes and averting her gaze from stares that followed her like persistent shadows. The late afternoon sun, caught in her auburn hair, pulled back in a severe bun that did nothing to diminish her striking presence. 3 months had passed since they buried Thomas. 3 months since Eleanor had stood beside the fresh-turned earth, towering above the other mourners who kept their distance, not out of respect for her grief, but out of the same unease they'd always shown around the woman they whispered was unnatural in her stature. The small cabin at the edge of town seemed to shrink further with each passing day, its walls closing in like a trap. Eleanor ran her fingertips along the table Thomas had built specially for her height, remembering how he'd laughed when he presented it, saying, "No more hunching for my Eleanor. In this house, you stand as tall as God made you." Thomas had been the exception. Thomas, with his gentle eyes and work-worn hands, who had looked at her towering frame and seen not an oddity but a marvel. "Like having my own personal redwood," he'd joke, reaching up to touch her cheek. Sturdy and magnificent. Now he was gone, shot in the back by a claim jumper who disappeared into the territories without a trace, leaving Eleanor alone with only his name, his cabin, and the growing suspicion of a town that had merely tolerated her presence when Thomas was alive. The knock at her door came just as she lit the evening lamp. Eleanor hesitated, measuring her breaths the way Thomas had taught her when anxiety tightened her chest. Few visitors came with kind intentions. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Sheriff Mill's voice carried through the wood, official and strained. "Need a word, if you please." Eleanor opened the door, instinctively stooping slightly, though the frame had been built to accommodate her height, another of Thomas's thoughtful modifications. Sheriff Mills removed his hat, twisting the brim between his fingers. Behind him stood Reverend Porter, whose perpetual frown seemed to deepen whenever his gaze fell upon Eleanor. 2 other men from the town council shifted uncomfortably behind them. "Evening, gentlemen," Eleanor said, her voice deliberately soft. She'd learned early in life that a deep voice from a woman her size frightened people. "What brings you here at this hour?" "Mrs. Blackwood," the sheriff began, avoiding direct eye contact. "There's been talk in town, concerns about your presence here now that Thomas is gone." Eleanor's spine straightened, adding another inch to her imposing height. "This is my home, Sheriff. My husband built it for us." Reverend Porter stepped forward, Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. "The drought has worsened, Mrs. Blackwood. Crops failing, wells drying up. People are frightened, looking for answers. And they believe I'm somehow responsible." The absurdity might have made her laugh if fear hadn't begun to coil around her heart like a rattlesnake preparing to strike. "There's talk," Sheriff Mills continued, "about your unusual stature, about how the troubles began not long after you arrived 3 years ago. Folks are saying..." "Saying what exactly?" Eleanor's patience thinned. She knew the whispers. "Witch, giant, abomination." "They're saying you've brought a curse upon Copper Creek," Reverend Porter stated flatly. "That your unnatural form is an affront to God's design, and he's punishing our town for harboring you." Eleanor felt the familiar cold wave of isolation wash over her. She'd heard such accusations before, had fled 2 towns already before meeting Thomas. She'd foolishly believed Copper Creek might be different. "What exactly do you expect me to do?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I can't make it rain. I can't shrink my body. I'm just a widow trying to survive, same as anyone." The men exchanged glances, a silent communication that sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. "For your safety," Sheriff Mills said, not meeting her eyes, "and for the peace of mind of the townspeople, we're asking you to come with us, just until this drought breaks." Eleanor saw the coiled rope in one man's hands, the determined set of their jaws. This wasn't a request. The sky darkened above Copper Creek, stars emerging like distant, cold witnesses to what was about to unfold. And Eleanor Blackwood, who had spent a lifetime trying to appear smaller than she was, suddenly wished she were large enough to fight the entire town. They came for her at dawn. Eleanor had not slept, instead spending the night gathering what few possessions she could carry. Thomas's pocket watch, their wedding daguerreotype, the pearl-handled brush her mother had given her. She knew better than to resist when the pounding resumed on her door. 6 men stood outside, Sheriff Mills at the front with a face carved from stone. "Time to come along, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, holding out a length of rope. Eleanor set her jaw. "I'll walk with dignity, Sheriff. I won't be led like livestock." For a moment, Mills looked ashamed, but the sentiment passed quickly. "As you wish, but know that we'll restrain you if necessary." The walk through town was one Eleanor would remember until her dying day. Doors opened as they passed, revealing faces tight with fear and righteous anger. Children were pulled inside, peeking from behind their mother's skirts. One boy threw a stone that struck Eleanor's shoulder, but she didn't flinch, wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her pain. "Witch! Devil woman! God forgive your abomination!" The words rained down harder than the occasional pebble or rotten apple. Eleanor fixed her gaze on the horizon and kept walking, each step measured and deliberate. She would not stoop or cower, not even as they led her to the town square where her fate awaited. The cage had been constructed overnight. Iron bars, salvaged from the abandoned mine on the outskirts of town, hastily assembled into a structure barely 6 feet in any dimension. A cage meant to humble her, to force her to hunch and bend, to break her. "This is madness," Eleanor said, turning to Sheriff Mills. "You know me. Thomas and I broke bread with your family. Your wife taught me to make her apple pie." Mills had the decency to look away. "It won't be forever, Eleanor. Just until the rains come, then folks will see it was all superstition and let you go." "And if the rains don't come?" she asked. The sheriff didn't answer. Reverend Porter stepped forward, Bible open in his hands. "Repent of your wickedness, woman, and perhaps God will show mercy to this town." Eleanor looked around at the faces of people she'd lived among for 3 years. Neighbors who'd nodded politely on the street, the blacksmith who'd repaired her plow, women who'd stood beside her at church every Sunday. Now they looked at her as if she were a monster, something to be feared and contained. "I have nothing to repent," she said, her voice carrying across the square. "I am as God made me, no more and no less." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Reverend's face darkened. "Your pride condemns you further." Eleanor's time had run out. Hands grabbed her shoulders, pushing her toward the cage door. She had to duck her head to enter, the space so confined that once inside, she could neither stand straight nor lie fully extended. The door clanged shut behind her, a padlock snapping into place. "A penny to see the giant witch," someone called out, and Eleanor realized with horror that this wasn't merely punishment. It was spectacle. A crudely painted sign was hammered into the ground beside the cage. "The giant widow of Copper Creek, behold God's warning against unnatural creatures." By midday, the curious had begun to gather, coins clutched in their hands. Children were lifted to peer between the bars, mothers telling them to behave lest the giant woman cast a spell on them. Some spat at her feet, others simply stared, as if trying to understand how a woman could grow so tall. Eleanor sat with her knees drawn to her chest, back curved painfully against the bars, the summer sun beating down on the metal cage. They'd given her a bucket of water at least, though it was already growing warm in the heat. Food was tossed in, scraps, as if to a dog. "Not so mighty now, are you?" sneered Harold Prescott, the banker who'd once asked her to reach a book from the top shelf of his office. "Maybe if you beg, we'll let you out for good behavior." Eleanor said nothing, would say nothing to these people who'd turned on her so completely. As the day wore on and the novelty began to fade, most drifted away, leaving her alone with her thirst and the growing ache in her cramped muscles. Night brought little relief. A single lantern hung from a post near the cage, casting long shadows through the bars across her huddled form. The town grew quiet, doors shut and locked against the darkness, and against her, as if her presence might contaminate even from behind iron bars. Eleanor closed her eyes, picturing Thomas's face, drawing strength from his memory. He had loved her height, her strength. "Never make yourself small for small-minded people," he'd told her. 3 months since they buried him, 3 months of solitude that had somehow led to this new public isolation. As the stars wheeled overhead, Eleanor Blackwood, the giant widow of Copper Creek, made a silent promise to herself. She would not break. She would endure. And somehow, someday, she would be free again. Days bled into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun that scorched Eleanor's skin during daylight hours and abandoned her to the bitter chill of desert nights. The drought continued unabated, the sky a relentless blue that mocked the townspeople's prayers for rain. Their frustration found its target in Eleanor, whose presence in the cage became both symbol and scapegoat for their suffering. A routine developed. Each morning, Sheriff Mills would approach with a ladle of fresh water and a plate of whatever scraps Mrs. Mills had deemed suitable for the prisoner. He never met Eleanor's eyes anymore, performing his duty with mechanical precision before retreating to his office across the square. "Still no rain," he'd mutter, as if expecting her to confess to stealing the clouds themselves. Children came after school, led by the butcher's son, Bradley, whose cruelty seemed to grow with each visit. They'd poke sticks through the bars, attempting to prod her into reaction, their jeers growing louder when Eleanor maintained her stoic silence. "My pa says they used to burn witches," Bradley announced one afternoon, his freckled face pressed against the bars. "Says maybe fire's the only thing that'll bring the rain back." Eleanor simply turned her face away, refusing to let him see the fear that pulsed through her at his words. The thought of fire brought back memories of stories her grandmother had told her. Stories of tall women in Europe, branded as witches for nothing more than their unusual height and knowledge of herbs. How many like her had perished in flames, she wondered, sacrificed to calm the fears of those who couldn't understand difference. By the 3rd week, Eleanor's body had adapted somewhat to the confines of the cage. She'd developed a routine of small stretches she could manage in the cramped space, shifting positions throughout the day to prevent her muscles from atrophying completely. Her skin had burned and peeled in the sun, then darkened to a deep bronze that made her look even more foreign to the pale-faced townspeople. "You're getting as dark as an Injun," Widow Holloway remarked with disgust, having come to deliver a sermon of her own invention about women who defied natural law. "The sun knows what you are, marking you like that." Eleanor almost laughed at the irony. Her height had always marked her, set her apart. What difference did the color of her skin make now? A month into her captivity, word of the giant witch of Copper Creek had spread to neighboring settlements. Travelers began to detour through town specifically to see the spectacle, bringing welcome business to the struggling merchants. the general store owner, sensing opportunity, began selling little wooden dolls with exaggerated proportions meant to represent Eleanor. The saloon offered a special whiskey called Witch's Brew. "You're saving the town after all," Reverend Porter told her during one of his weekly visits, to offer salvation through repentance. Though not in the way God intended, I suspect. Through it all, Eleanor maintained her dignity. She spoke only when necessary, conserving her energy and her spirit. At night, when the town slept, she would sometimes whisper Thomas's name into the darkness, reminding herself of the love they had shared, the life they had built. His memory became a private sanctuary where no iron bars could reach. It was during the 6th week that Eleanor first noticed him, a tall figure observing from the shadows of the livery stable. Unlike the other Gawkers, he did not approach the cage or toss coins to the boy who'd appointed himself her unofficial keeper. For 3 days, he watched from a distance, his presence a constant Eleanor found herself anticipating each morning. On the 4th day, he moved closer, and Eleanor saw him clearly for the first time. He was Apache, dressed in a curious blend of traditional clothing and items clearly traded from white settlers. His black hair was pulled back, revealing a face marked with lines of experience rather than age. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his eyes meeting hers without shame or accusation. "Yate," he said, a greeting in his native tongue. Eleanor, parched from days of limited speech, found her voice rough as she replied, "Good day to you as well, sir." The man nodded, seemingly pleased she had responded. "I am Maka," he offered, his English careful but clear. "Eleanor Blackwood," she replied, the simple act of introducing herself bringing an unexpected sense of personhood after weeks of being referred to only as the witch or the giant. Maka studied her with eyes that seemed to see beyond the cage, beyond the spectacle she'd been reduced to. "The tall one," he said thoughtfully. "Among my people you would be respected for this." Before Eleanor could respond, Bradley appeared, waving his arms aggressively. "Hey, you can't talk to her without paying, that's the rule." Maka turned slowly, regarding the boy with calm assessment. Without a word, he reached into a pouch at his waist and extracted a small silver coin, which he handed to the child. Then, with a final nod to Eleanor, he turned and walked away. That night, as the stars emerged above her cage, Eleanor found herself wondering about the Apache man, the first person in weeks who had spoken to her as a human being rather than an abomination. For the first time since her imprisonment began, a fragile tendril of hope took root in her heart. Perhaps she had found an ally in this unlikely place. Or perhaps, she thought as exhaustion finally pulled her toward sleep, it was merely the kindness of a passing stranger, a brief respite before the long cruelty of her days resumed. The Apache returned the next day, and the day after that. Each visit followed the same pattern. Maka would approach the cage, offer his greeting, and pay the required coin to Bradley. Then he would simply stand there, sometimes speaking softly in a mixture of his language and English, other times maintaining a companionable silence that Eleanor found more comforting than any words of false sympathy. "My people know what it is to be caged," he told her on his 5th visit, his voice low enough that the dwindling crowd of onlookers couldn't hear. "To be looked at as less than human." Eleanor nodded, understanding flowing between them. "Why do you come back?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Surely there are more pleasant sights in Copper Creek." A hint of a smile touched Maka's lips. "I see no sight more worthy of respect than dignity that refuses to break." His words warmed something inside her that had grown cold during her captivity. Eleanor found herself straightening her posture as much as the cage allowed, a gesture that sent pain shooting through her cramped muscles, but satisfied something deeper than physical comfort. The townspeople noticed Maka's regular visits, their suspicion growing with each appearance. "That Injun's taking a shine to the giant," whispered Mrs. Peterson to Mrs. Mills as they passed the cage on their way to the general store. Unnatural creatures drawn to each other, I suppose? Reverend Porter confronted Maka directly one afternoon, Bible clutched in his pale hands. What business do you have with this woman, heathen? Come to share in her wickedness? Maka regarded the Reverend with the same calm assessment he'd given Bradley on that first day. I come to witness strength, he said simply. Something your God might recognize, if not his servant. The Reverend's face flushed crimson. You'd do well to remember you're barely tolerated in these parts, Indian. Don't push the town's goodwill. Eleanor watched this exchange with growing concern. Please, she said to Maka, after the Reverend had stormed off. Don't make trouble for yourself on my account. Maka's expression softened when he looked at her. Trouble finds those who stand apart, whether they seek it or not. This is something we both know. During these conversations, Eleanor learned that Maka was a trader who traveled between Apache territory and the frontier settlements, exchanging furs and crafts for tools and supplies his people needed. He was respected among his tribe for his ability to navigate both worlds, though never fully trusted by the white settlements he visited. I walk between, he explained one evening as the setting sun painted the cage bars with golden light. Not fully belonging to either place, but creating a path where others might follow. Eleanor understood this too well. Even before her imprisonment, she had always existed in a space apart, too tall for the world of women, too female for the world of men, caught between expectations and reality. As the days passed, Maka began bringing small gifts. A strip of jerky slipped through the bars when no one was watching, a pouch of clean water to supplement her meager rations, a tiny carved wooden bird that she could conceal in her palm. Each gift was a small act of rebellion against her dehumanization, a recognition of her worth when all others had denied it. 2 months into her captivity, the drought reached a devastating peak. Crops withered in the fields, livestock grew thin, and wells began to run dry. The mood in Copper Creek darkened further, desperation breeding a more dangerous strain of fear. Time's running out for you, witch, Bradley informed her with malicious glee. Heard my pa talking with the other men. They're saying the cage ain't enough, that you're still casting your spell from in there. Eleanor had learned to discount most of the boy's taunts, but something in his tone sent a chill through her. That night, the town council gathered in the saloon. Through the open windows, their voices carried across the square to where Eleanor sat huddled in her cage. We've given it enough time, came Harold Prescott's voice, sharp with conviction. The drought worsens, our livestock are dying, and that aberration sits in our midst, mocking our suffering. What would you have us do? Sheriff Mills asked. We can't just... Salem knew what to do with witches, someone else interjected. So did the good people across Europe for centuries. Fire cleanses. Reverend Porter's solemn declaration silenced the murmurs. God's judgment made manifest. Eleanor's blood turned to ice as the voices continued, debating not whether she should die, but when and how publicly the execution should be carried out. Her fingers closed around the small wooden bird Maka had given her, its smooth surfaces grounding her in the moment. When Maka appeared from the shadows near her cage an hour later, she knew from his expression that he had heard everything. The question in his eyes was clear, though he didn't voice it. Yes, Eleanor whispered, answering the unspoken question. If you can help me, please. I don't want to die here. Maka disappeared into the night without another word, leaving Eleanor to wonder if she had placed her trust in the wrong hands. Perhaps he had simply been curious, as so many others were, and would now abandon her to her fate. The thought hollowed out what little hope had begun to grow within her. Dawn came with unusual activity in the town square. Men hammered and sawed near the gallows platform that hadn't been used since the hanging of a horse thief 2 years prior. Eleanor watched with growing dread as they constructed what could only be a pyre. Rough logs stacked in a circular pattern, a sturdy post driven into the center. "Should be quite a show tomorrow," Bradley informed her, practically bouncing with excitement as he delivered her morning water. "Pa says they'll do it at noon when the sun's highest. Says maybe your witch smoke will punch a hole in the sky and let the rain through." He laughed, a child's laugh incongruously paired with talk of murder. Eleanor closed her eyes, refusing to give the boy the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Inside, her mind raced. One day. She had 1 day left to live unless Maka returned, or unless she could somehow free herself. She examined the cage for the 100th time, searching for weakness in its construction. The iron bars, though hastily assembled, were solid. The padlock that secured the door was sturdy, its key kept on Sheriff Mills's belt. Even if she could somehow reach it, where would she go? A woman of her height couldn't exactly blend into the landscape or disappear into a crowd. As morning stretched into afternoon, Eleanor found herself remembering a story Thomas had told her about a wolf that had once been caught in a trap near their property. How the desperate creature had gnawed through its own limb to escape, choosing mutilation over captivity. She looked down at her own hands, wondering if such desperate measures were all that remained to her. The town's preparations continued with grim efficiency. Reverend Porter supervised the construction while composing the sermon he would deliver before the execution. Women gathered kindling in their aprons, some looking troubled, but none raising their voices in protest. "What good will burning the poor woman do?" Eleanor overheard Mrs. Mills whisper to another woman as they passed. "Won't bring rain." "Hush," her companion replied. "Folks need something to hope for. And if she is a witch, well..." Their voices faded as they moved away, leaving the sentence unfinished. Eleanor leaned her head against the bars, exhaustion seeping into her bones. If this was to be her last day alive, she wished she could at least stand at her full height one more time, feel the dignity of her stature instead of this cramped submission. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the square, an unusual commotion arose from the direction of the general store. Raised voices, exclamations of surprise, and the heavy tread of many boots drew Eleanor's attention. Through gaps between buildings, she glimpsed a line of pack animals, mules laden with bundles of furs, beaded crafts, and other trade goods. Leading them was Maka, his expression impassive as he directed his small caravan toward the center of town. Hope fluttered in Eleanor's chest, though she dared not let it show on her face. She watched as Maka engaged Mr. Sawyer, the general store owner, in conversation, gesturing toward his goods. Other townspeople gathered around, examining the quality of the pelts with obvious interest. "Finest collection I've brought to Copper Creek," Maka announced, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "Worth more in Santa Fe or Tucson, but I thought your town might appreciate first choice, given the difficulties you face." Eleanor understood the strategy immediately. In a drought-stricken community where commerce had slowed to a trickle, the arrival of valuable goods for trade was significant enough to distract even from the spectacle of her cage. Harold Prescott pushed through the crowd, eyeing the furs with barely concealed greed. "Might be interested in some of those beaver pelts," he said, "but we're not exactly flush with cash these days, thanks to this cursed drought." Maka nodded, his demeanor sympathetic. "I understand hard times. Perhaps we can reach an agreement that benefits all." The trading continued as the sun sank lower, Maka skillfully keeping the attention of the town's most influential men. Eleanor noticed how he positioned himself gradually closer to the cage with each negotiation, until finally, as twilight painted the sky in purple hues, he stood directly before her, his back to her, as he displayed a particularly fine fox pelt to Sheriff Mills. "What would you take for the lot?" Mills asked, gesturing to the entire caravan. "Everything you've brought?" A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Such a purchase would be unprecedented. Maka appeared to consider, then turned slowly, his gaze falling deliberately on Eleanor in her cage. "For everything?" he repeated thoughtfully. "I would take her." Silence fell over the square, heavy and sudden as a thunderclap. "The witch!" Reverend Porter spluttered, finding his voice first. "What business could you possibly have with her?" Maka's expression remained calm, his voice steady. "My business is my own, but I offer a fair trade, all my season's work for the woman you plan to burn tomorrow." Harold Prescott recovered from his shock enough to laugh derisively. "You want to trade valuable goods for a freak of nature? For what purpose? To display in your own tribe's sideshow?" Maka didn't rise to the bait. "My reasons are mine. Your drought is yours. My furs might help you survive it. The woman means nothing to you except as a scapegoat." The town council members exchanged glances, a silent calculation visible in their expressions. The furs and trade goods represented real value, far more than they would gain from executing Eleanor. "She's been judged a witch," Reverend Porter insisted, but with less conviction now. "It would be irresponsible to release her." "Then sell her to me," Maka replied simply. "Her fate becomes my responsibility, not yours." Sheriff Mills stepped forward, keys jingling at his belt. "I say we take the deal. Drought's not her doing anyway, and we could use those supplies." Eleanor held her breath, scarcely daring to believe what was happening. From death sentence to trade goods in the space of an hour, the absurdity might have made her laugh if her life didn't hang in the balance. As the town debated her fate like merchants haggling over livestock, her eyes met Maka's for just a moment. In that brief connection, she saw something that had been missing from every other face in Copper Creek for months. Recognition, not of the spectacle, the giant, or the supposed witch. Recognition of Eleanor Blackwood, the woman. The debate lasted well into the night, torches casting flickering shadows across the square as the town council argued the merits of Maka's offer. Eleanor remained silent in her cage, afraid to show either hope or despair, lest it sway the decision against her. Maka stood like a statue nearby, his patience seemingly limitless as the white men circled through the same arguments repeatedly. "The pelts alone would fetch enough in Denver to see us through until the rains come," Harold Prescott admitted reluctantly. "And if they never come," demanded Reverend Porter, "if her evil follows her and we've given up our only chance to cleanse the land, then we're no worse off than we are now," Sheriff Mills countered, "but a damn sight richer in supplies." In the end, pragmatism prevailed over superstition. As the midnight hour approached, Sheriff Mills stepped forward, keys in hand. "We accept your trade, Indian, the witch for your goods. But understand this, neither of you can ever return to Copper Creek. The deal is exile for you both, permanent and absolute." Maka nodded once, accepting the terms without comment. Eleanor held her breath as the sheriff approached her cage, the key sliding into the padlock that had secured her captivity for these long months. The mechanism turned with a heavy click that seemed to reverberate through her very bones. "Stand back!" Mills ordered as he swung the door open, as if she might lunge at him despite muscles atrophied from confinement. Eleanor moved carefully, her body protesting as she uncurled from the cramped position she had maintained for so long. Sharp pins and needles stabbed through her legs as blood rushed to restore circulation. She gripped the bars for support, willing herself not to collapse in front of these people who had already seen her at her most vulnerable. Slowly, with deliberate dignity, Eleanor Blackwood stepped out of the cage that had been her home and her hell. For the first time in 3 months, she straightened to her full height, 6 feet and 4 inches of woman rising like a phoenix from the ashes of degradation. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers, some taking involuntary steps backward as if she might suddenly grow even larger now that she was freed. "My God," someone whispered, "she really is a giant." Eleanor ignored them, focusing instead on each painful step as Maka silently moved to her side. He didn't touch her but remained close enough to assist if her strength failed. His presence was like an anchor in the shifting tide of murmurs and stares. "The woman will need her possessions," Maka stated, addressing Sheriff Mills. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded to a deputy. "Fetch her things from the storage room." While they waited, Reverend Porter approached, Bible extended before him like a shield. "Mark my words," he intoned, his voice carrying across the square. "God's judgment will follow you both, unnatural creatures drawn together by darkness." "Enough," Eleanor interrupted, her voice rough from disuse but steady. "You've had your sermons, Reverend. You've had your spectacle. Now honor your bargain and let us depart in peace." The Reverend's mouth snapped shut, his expression twisting with indignation at being addressed so directly by the woman he had condemned. Before he could respond, the deputy returned with a small bundle, the meager possessions Eleanor had gathered the night of her arrest, now dusty from months of neglect. Maka oversaw the transfer of his goods to the townspeople, giving instructions for the care of his pack animals and the proper handling of the more delicate items. Throughout the transaction, he maintained a businesslike demeanor, never revealing a hint of triumph or relief. As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Eleanor and Maka walked side by side toward the edge of town. She moved slowly, each step painful but precious in its freedom. Neither spoke until the last building of Copper Creek fell behind them, and only the open road stretched ahead. "Thank you," Eleanor said simply, the words wholly inadequate for the life he had purchased with his season's work. Maka nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "Some prices are worth paying." They continued in silence for a time, Eleanor focusing on placing one foot before the other, her muscles protesting after months of inactivity. When they reached a small copse of trees beside a dry creek bed, Maka gestured toward a modest camp he had apparently prepared in advance. A small tent, a fire pit ready for lighting, and a pair of horses tethered nearby. "You expected the town to agree," Eleanor observed, lowering herself carefully onto a fallen log. "I expected greed to overcome fear," he corrected. "It usually does among such men." Eleanor studied him openly now, free from the bars that had framed her view of him for weeks. In the growing light, she could see the intricate beadwork on his vest, the care with which his hair was tied back, the quiet confidence in his bearing. He moved with purpose, lighting the fire and setting a pot of water to boil. "Why?" she asked finally, the question that had burned within her since his offer. "Why trade everything for me?" Maka paused in his preparations, meeting her gaze directly. "I told you before, my people know what it is to be caged, to be seen as less than human." "There are many injustices in the world," Eleanor pressed. "You cannot right them all with your furs and trade goods." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, but this one I could." He handed her a cup of steaming tea brewed from herbs he had gathered. Eleanor accepted it gratefully, the warmth seeping into her stiff fingers. The simple luxury of holding something beautiful, the delicately painted clay cup, nearly brought tears to her eyes after months of drinking from a rusted tin can. "When I was a boy," Maka said, settling across from her, "soldiers captured my uncle. They put him in a wooden cage, much like yours, dragged him from town to town as an example. The savage Apache, they called him, though he was a man of peace, a healer. I was too young, too weak to help him then." Understanding dawned in Eleanor's heart. "So I am your redemption." Maka shook his head. "You are yourself. I am myself. What passed between us was trade, not charity. You gave me purpose. I gave you freedom, a fair exchange." Eleanor considered his words, turning the cup between her palms. In Copper Creek, every interaction had been tinged with judgment, with the weight of her difference. Here, with this man who had sacrificed so much for her liberty, she sensed no expectation beyond the moment they shared. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now you heal," Maka replied. "Then when you are ready, you choose your path. My people's camp is 3 days' ride from here. You would be welcome there, or I can guide you to another town where your story is unknown." Eleanor gazed into the fire, considering options she had thought forever lost to her. Freedom of choice, perhaps the greatest gift Maka had given her, more precious even than her liberation. "And if I wish to travel with you for a time," she ventured, "to learn the path between worlds that you walk?" Something warm flickered in Maka's eyes, like the first embers of a fire promising greater heat to come. "Then I would be honored by such company," Eleanor Blackwood. The days that followed brought Eleanor both pain and healing. Her body, cramped for so long in unnatural positions, rebelled as she relearned the simple pleasure of standing upright. Muscles screamed, joints cracked, and skin peeled away in layers, revealing new pink flesh beneath the damage done by sun and neglect. Maka proved to be a patient companion. He prepared salves of yarrow and juniper for her raw skin, brewed willowbark tea for her pain, and gave her space when memories of the cage closed in around her like phantom bars. At night, when nightmares jolted her awake, gasping and disoriented, he would simply stoke the fire and speak in his low, measured voice until reality settled around her once more. They remained at the creek bed camp for nearly a week, giving Eleanor time to regain some strength before attempting the journey to Apache territory. During daylight hours, she took short walks, each day venturing a little farther, reclaiming her relationship with the vastness of the landscape after being confined to a space barely large enough to turn around in. "I had forgotten how small everything looks from up here," she remarked one evening, watching the sunset from a nearby hilltop. It was the first time she had joked about her height since her rescue. Maka glanced up at her, a smile warming his eyes. "The world is different, depending on where we stand to view it. My grandmother used to say, that's why the eagle flies so high, to see what is hidden from those who stay on the ground." "And what do you see, Maka, walking between two worlds as you do?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious about the man who had become her unexpected savior. He considered the question thoughtfully, as he did all things. "I see fear dressed as hatred. I see strength mistaken for threat. I see beauty overlooked because it does not fit into familiar patterns." His gaze lingered on her face before returning to the horizon. "And I see possibility where others see only barriers." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the evening breeze rustling through the scrub brush. Eleanor found herself studying his profile, the strong lines of his face silhouetted against the darkening sky. In Copper Creek, people had called her unnatural, a giant, an abomination. Yet here was a man who looked at her and saw simply Eleanor, neither diminished by her captivity nor defined by her stature. "Tell me about your husband," Maka said suddenly, catching her by surprise. It was the first time he had mentioned Thomas. Eleanor's throat tightened. "How did you know I was married?" "They called you the widow in town, and you wear this." He gestured to the simple gold band she still wore, though it had grown loose on her finger during her captivity. She twisted the ring absently. His name was Thomas Blackwood. He built furniture, beautiful pieces with inlaid wood and careful joinery. He made everything in our home to fit my height. Her voice caught on the memory. He was the first person who never made me feel like I needed to apologize for the space I occupied in the world. Maka nodded, understanding in his eyes. a wise man. He was killed for a gold claim that turned out to be worthless, Eleanor continued, the words flowing more easily than she had expected. Shot in the back while he was working the site. I wasn't there. I might have been able to stop it if I had been. I was always stronger than him, than most men, really. Strength comes in many forms, Marka observed. Your Thomas had the strength to love without fear. That is rare. Eleanor looked down at her hands, calloused from work, before her imprisonment, and now bearing new marks from the cage bars. What about you? She asked. Is there someone waiting for you to return? Marka shook his head. My wife died of the spotted fever 6 winters ago. Our son died the following spring. He spoke simply, without self-pity, but Eleanor heard the depth of loss beneath his measured words. I'm sorry, she said softly, as am I for your Thomas. He gazed at the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. My people believe those we have loved watch over us from the spirit world, that they guide us toward our true path, even when that path leads through shadow. Eleanor considered this. Do you think Thomas guided you to find me? A smile touched Marka's lips. Perhaps. Or perhaps your strength called out to something in me that recognized itself in you. The simple honesty of his words warmed something deep within Eleanor that had grown cold during her months in the cage. A sense of her own worthiness, her right to exist as she was made. As they prepared to depart the following morning, Eleanor found herself both anxious and eager to see the Apache camp. Will your people accept me? She asked, adjusting the saddle on the horse Marka had provided for her, a sturdy paint mare with a gentle temperament. They will be curious, he admitted, securing their provisions. A tall white woman is unusual, but they will not fear your difference as the people of Copper Creek did. How can you be sure? The memory of how quickly her neighbors had turned on her remained raw. Marka paused in his work, giving her question the consideration it deserved. Among my people, those who stand apart are often believed to have special connection to the spirit world. Your height would be seen as a gift, not a curse. He secured the last strap before continuing. But more importantly, you come with me. I have earned the right to bring whom I choose. The simple confidence in his statement reassured Eleanor more than elaborate promises might have. Marka didn't speak in absolutes or offer guarantees. He simply stated what he believed to be true, his quiet certainty, a foundation she could trust. They rode out as the morning sun cleared the eastern hills, Eleanor swaying slightly in the saddle, her body still adjusting to movement after months of confinement. The desert landscape stretched before them, harsh and beautiful in its vastness. Birds circled overhead, their cries carrying on the clear air. After the fetid confines of the cage, each breath felt like a miracle, clean, free, and full of possibility. There is a story among my people, Marka said as they picked their way through a rocky passage, about a woman who grew so tall she could touch the clouds. The other women in her village were jealous and tried to cut her down to their size, but each night she would grow again. Eleanor listened, intrigued by both the tale and the fact that he chose to share it with her. One day, the Sky People saw this tall woman and recognized her as one of their own, separated from them at birth. They called to her, but she had grown to love the Earth People despite their cruelty. So instead of ascending to the sky, she taught the people how to grow tall in spirit, if not in body. And did they learn? Eleanor asked. Marka's eyes met hers, warm with something that might have been admiration. Some did. Those who were willing to look up rather than pull down. As they continued their journey, Eleanor felt something shifting within her, not just the physical healing of her body, but a deeper restoration. With each mile that separated her from Copper Creek, the cage receded further into memory. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. And beside her rode a man who had sacrificed everything he owned to purchase her freedom, yet treated her as if she had done him a favor by accepting it. On the third day of their journey, Macha led Eleanor through a narrow canyon passage, its high walls providing blessed shade from the midday sun. As they emerged on the other side, the landscape opened up to reveal a hidden valley cradled between protective hills, and nestled within it, the Apache camp. Eleanor's first impression was one of ordered activity. Unlike the cramped, haphazard arrangement of Copper Creek, the Apache dwellings, wickiups made of brush and hide, were positioned with deliberate spacing. Women worked at outdoor tasks, children played in the central area, and several men sat in a circle deep in discussion. Smoke rose from cooking fires, carrying the scent of unfamiliar but enticing food. Their approach did not go unnoticed. As they rode closer, activity in the camp slowed, then halted altogether. Children pointed and whispered, adults straightened, their expressions guarded but curious. Eleanor felt the familiar weight of stares, but there was something different in these gazes, assessment without immediate judgment. An older man separated himself from the group and walked forward to meet them. His bearing marked him as a leader even before Macha dismounted and greeted him with respect. "Nantai," Macha said, "I have returned." The elder's eyes moved from Macha to Eleanor, still mounted on her horse. She sat straight, neither hunching nor attempting to minimize her height. If she had learned anything from her time in the cage, it was that hiding what she was only gave others permission to shame her for it. "So I see," Nantai replied in English, surprising Eleanor, "and you bring a visitor from the white world, a very tall visitor." Macha nodded. "This is Eleanor Blackwood. She has suffered greatly at the hands of her own people. I have brought her here to heal and to learn our ways, if she wishes." Nantai studied Eleanor with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Dismount," he said, neither a welcome nor a rejection. "Let me look at you properly." Eleanor slid carefully from the saddle, wincing slightly as her still recovering muscles protested. When she stood at her full height before the elder, she towered over him by more than a foot. To his credit, Nantai showed no intimidation, only thoughtful consideration. "You stand like one who has carried a heavy burden," he observed. "Yes," Eleanor replied simply. "And now?" She glanced at Macha, then back to the elder. "Now I seek to stand straight again." A flicker of approval crossed Nantai's weathered face. He turned to address the gathered tribe in Apache, speaking too rapidly for Eleanor to catch any of the words Macha had taught her during their journey. When he finished, the tension in the camp eased visibly. Women returned to their tasks, though their glances still flickered toward Eleanor with undisguised curiosity. "You may stay," Nantai told her. "Macha will show you our ways. In return, perhaps you will share what skills you possess." With that pragmatic arrangement established, he turned and walked back toward the circle of men, who immediately leaned in to hear his assessment of the strange, tall woman. A young woman approached, her movements graceful and direct. "I am Kiona," she said, her English halting but clear. "Macha's sister, come. You must be tired from the journey." Eleanor followed her to a wickiup on the camp's edge, larger than some, with fresh hides covering its frame. Inside was a sleeping pallet, a few woven baskets and a small fire pit. Simple, but clean and far more spacious than the cage that had been her home for months. "For you," Kiona explained. "Macha sent word of your coming. He said you needed room to stand tall." Emotion constricted Eleanor's throat as she realized the dwelling had been specially prepared for her unusual height. Such consideration was something she had known only from Thomas before now. "Thank you," she managed, ducking through the entrance. Kiona nodded, then hesitated, curiosity plainly wrestling with politeness. "Is it true what Macha told us? That your own people kept you in a cage like an animal? Eleanor stiffened, the memory still too raw. Yes. Anger flashed in Kiona's eyes. Then they are the animals, not you. With that simple but profound observation, she departed, leaving Eleanor alone to absorb her new surroundings. That evening, Eleanor joined the tribe for the communal meal, sitting slightly apart, but not isolated. Children stared openly until their mothers redirected them with quiet words. Several women, overcoming initial shyness, approached to offer food and halting questions about life in the white settlements. Eleanor answered as best she could, struck by their genuine interest. Maka moved throughout the camp, speaking with various members, but his gaze frequently returned to Eleanor as if assuring himself of her comfort. When the meal concluded, he came to sit beside her. "You are doing well," he observed. "Already they begin to see past your height to the woman beneath." "Your people are more welcoming than I expected," Eleanor admitted, "though I imagine some still have reservations." Maka nodded, honest as always. "Some fear you represent danger from the white world. Others worry your presence may attract unwanted attention from soldiers or settlers, but Nantai has spoken for you, and his word carries weight." "And you?" Eleanor asked. "Do you regret bringing me here?" In the firelight, his eyes were dark and steady. "I regret only that I did not find you sooner, before your spirit was tested so harshly." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and distant singing from one of the dwellings. For the first time since Thomas's death, Eleanor felt the whisper of belonging, tentative but real. "Tomorrow," Maka said eventually, "you begin your new life, whatever shape you wish it to take." Eleanor looked around the camp at the people who had accepted her presence without demanding she make herself smaller. Then she looked at Maka, who had sacrificed everything to free a woman he barely knew, asking nothing in return except that she reclaim her dignity. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like to learn everything you are willing to teach." The seasons shifted as Eleanor found her place among the Apache. Summer heat gave way to the gentler warmth of autumn, the desert landscape transforming in subtle ways that she learned to read as Maka and others taught her. Where once she had seen only barren emptiness, she now recognized the abundant life that thrived in this harsh environment, each plant, animal, and insect playing its role in the delicate balance. Her days took on a rhythm unlike anything she had known in her previous life. She rose with the sun and worked alongside the women, her height proving advantageous for many tasks. Though initially awkward with unfamiliar tools and techniques, Eleanor's natural intelligence and determination earned her the respect of even the most skeptical tribe members. Kiona became her most patient teacher, demonstrating the proper way to prepare hides, weave baskets, and gather the desert plants that provided food and medicine. In exchange, Eleanor shared skills from her former life, showing the women how to make soap using techniques her mother had taught her, and introducing new stitching methods that some adopted for their own work. "You have good hands," Kiona observed one afternoon as they sat together preparing yucca fibers. "Strong, but careful." "Thomas used to say the same," Eleanor replied, her husband's name coming more easily now, the sharp pain of his memory softening with time. "He taught me to sand wood for his furniture, said I had a feel for the grain that he envied." Kiona nodded thoughtfully. "Maka also works with wood. Perhaps you could show him what you know." Eleanor glanced across the camp, where Maka was instructing several boys in the art of bow making. Since bringing her to the tribe, he had maintained a respectful distance, visiting her dwelling occasionally to ensure her comfort, but never presuming upon the connection that had formed during their journey together. His consideration touched her deeply, even as she found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet strength. "Perhaps," she agreed, The children of the tribe, after their initial wariness, had become Eleanor's most enthusiastic companions. Unlike their parents, they had no preconceptions about what a white woman should be, and her height was a source of wonder rather than discomfort. They begged for rides on her shoulders, brought her interesting stones and feathers they found, and peppered her with questions about the world beyond their valley. "Why did the people in your town not like tall women?" asked 7-year-old Taluta one day as Eleanor helped her grind corn. Eleanor considered how to answer truthfully without burdening the child with the ugliness she had experienced. "Sometimes people fear what is different," she said finally. "They feel safer when everyone is the same." Taluta frowned, puzzled by this concept. "But if everyone were the same, how would we know who is who?" The simple wisdom in the child's question made Eleanor smile. Indeed. Perhaps that's something the people of Copper Creek never thought to ask themselves. As her body healed and strengthened, Eleanor began joining hunting parties, her height and keen eyesight making her an asset when tracking game. On these excursions, she often found herself working directly with Maka, learning to move silently through the terrain, to read animal signs, to honor the creatures whose lives sustained the tribe. "You have the patience of a born hunter," he told her after she made her first clean kill, a mule deer whose meat would feed many. There was genuine admiration in his voice and something more that sent warmth coursing through Eleanor's veins despite the autumn chill. "I had a good teacher," she replied, holding his gaze until he looked away, a rare moment of uncertainty crossing his usually composed features. That night, as the tribe celebrated the successful hunt with music and storytelling around the central fire, Nantai gestured for Eleanor to join the circle of elders, an honor she had not previously been granted. Conscious of the significance, she sat with careful dignity, her height for once allowing her to look directly into the eyes of the seated men without awkwardness. "Eleanor Blackwood," Nantai said, using her full name as he always did. "You have lived among us now for many moons. You have learned our ways with an open heart and shared your own knowledge freely. The children look to you for stories. The hunters value your sharp eyes. The women speak well of your willing hands." Eleanor inclined her head, accepting his words, but unsure where they were leading. "Yet there remains a distance," the elder continued. "You live among us, but not as one of us. Is this by your choice, or do you feel unwelcome still?" The directness of the question caught her by surprise. She glanced at Maka, who watched her with quiet intensity but offered no guidance. "I am grateful for the welcome I have received," she answered carefully. "More kindness than I dared hope for. But I am aware that my presence may cause difficulties for your people. The army patrols more frequently since I arrived." Nantai nodded, acknowledging the truth of her observation. Twice in recent weeks, soldiers had approached the camp's perimeter, ostensibly checking for raiding parties, but clearly searching for signs of white captives. Though Eleanor had remained hidden during these visits, the risk of discovery was real. "All choices carry danger," Nantai said philosophically. "The question is whether the value outweighs the risk." Eleanor sensed the conversation had deeper currents than were immediately apparent. "What are you asking of me, Elder?" The old man smiled slightly. "Nothing you are not prepared to give, but it is time for clarity. Either you are a visitor who will eventually return to your own kind, or you are one who seeks to become part of this tribe. Which is it?" The question crystallized something Eleanor had been feeling for weeks, a growing certainty about where she belonged, where she was valued for exactly who and what she was. "I wish to stay," she said firmly, "if you will have me." Nantai's eyes crinkled with satisfaction, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. "Good. Then there is one more question that must be asked, though not by me." He nodded to Maka, who rose from his place in the circle and moved to stand before Eleanor. In the firelight, his face was both familiar and somehow new, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time. He extended his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. "Walk with me?" he asked simply. Eleanor placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her rise, though she needed no assistance. Together they moved away from the fire and into the quieter darkness beyond the circle of dwellings. Neither spoke until they reached a small rise overlooking the valley, the camp's fires visible below like earthbound stars. Maka released her hand but remained close, his presence solid and reassuring in the cool night air. "Nantai believes you should formally join the tribe," he said at last. "Through marriage." Eleanor's heart quickened. "I see. And what do you believe, Maka?" He turned to face her fully, no barrier of cage bars or propriety or uncertainty between them now. "I believe that from the moment I saw you in that town square, dignified even in your suffering, something in my spirit recognized yours, like calling to like." "And is that enough?" Eleanor asked softly. "Recognition? It is a beginning." His voice deepened slightly. "The rest, respect, understanding, trust, these we have built in the moon since. As for love..." He paused, and Eleanor realized with sudden clarity that this man who had faced down an entire town of hostile settlers was nervous. "As for love," she prompted gently. "That has grown too," he admitted, "though I was not certain you felt the same." Eleanor smiled, the expression feeling natural in a way it hadn't since before her imprisonment. For a man who sees so clearly, you can be remarkably blind. Maka's answering smile transformed his serious face, revealing a warmth that few were privileged to witness. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he reached up to touch her cheek, a gesture that required him to stretch upward slightly, a reversal of the usual dynamic Eleanor had experienced with men. Instead of making her feel awkward or unfeminine, the moment felt right, balanced, each of them exactly as they were meant to be. "Eleanor Blackwood," Maka said, his voice carrying the weight of significance, "you stand tall like the mountains my people revere. I offer not pity, but partnership. Will you join your strength with mine as my wife?" In the moonlight, tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, not from pain or humiliation as they had so often during her captivity, but from a joy so profound it bordered on disbelief. This man who had first seen her caged like an animal now looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. "Yes," she answered, the single word carrying all the certainty her heart contained. Maka's hands, strong and gentle, reached up to frame her face. Eleanor bent slightly, meeting him halfway in a gesture that symbolized the balance they had found together. When their lips met, it was a seal upon an understanding deeper than words, a recognition of two souls who had found in each other not completion, but amplification of their own strengths. They returned to the central fire hand in hand, where Nantai awaited with knowing eyes. The elder listened to their decision, then nodded with satisfaction. "The union will be celebrated at the next full moon," he announced to the gathered tribe. "Until then, preparations must be made. Eleanor Blackwood will learn our marriage rituals, and we will honor what traditions of her people she wishes to keep." In the days that followed, Eleanor was swept into a flurry of activity unlike anything she had experienced in her previous life. Keona and the other women took charge of crafting her wedding garments, a dress of soft deerskin, elaborately beaded with symbols of strength and fertility. They taught her the ceremonial steps she would take, the words she would speak, the significance behind each ritual element. "In our tradition," Keona explained as she worked on a special blanket that would join Eleanor and Maka during the ceremony, "marriage is not just between two people. It is a binding of families, of past and future." Eleanor, threading beads onto the dress that had been specially measured for her height, considered this. "Thomas and I were married by a justice of the peace," she recalled. It took less than 5 minutes. His family didn't approve of me, said I was too odd, too tall, too strong-minded. Kiona snorted. White people fear strong women. Apache men know better. Not all white men, Eleanor said softly, remembering Thomas's steadfast love. No, Kiona conceded, not all. Just as not all Apache are wise, but our traditions teach us to value strength in women as well as men. As the full moon approached, Eleanor incorporated elements from her own background into the preparations. She taught several young women to make the lace-edged handkerchief that, in her mother's Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, a bride carried to collect well wishes. She fashioned a small wooden carving as a gift for Maka, utilizing the skills Thomas had shared with her during their marriage. The day before the ceremony, as Eleanor collected juniper berries with Taluta, a rider approached the camp at speed. The warning call went up immediately, men moving to defensive positions, while women gathered children to safety. Eleanor hurried back, heart pounding with the memory of soldiers and threats. But it was Maka's cousin, Ahote, returning from a trading expedition to settlements farther north. He dismounted in a swirl of dust, his expression grim as he conferred with Nantai and other elders. Eleanor stood at a distance, anxiety building until Maka broke away from the group and came to her side. "What is it?" she asked, reading the tension in his frame. "News from Copper Creek," he said quietly. "Ahote heard it in his travels. The town is abandoned." Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. "Abandoned? How? Why?" The drought continued. Wells failed completely. Then sickness came. Some fever that spread quickly among the weakened people. Those who survived packed what they could carry and left. His eyes held hers steadily. They scattered to other settlements, telling a story of a witch's curse that destroyed their town. A complex tangle of emotions washed through Eleanor. Vindication, sorrow, a fierce satisfaction that justice of a sort had been served, and underneath it all, a surprising flicker of pity for those who had tormented her. "Do you think they were right?" she asked. "That I somehow cursed them?" Maka shook his head. "I think they cursed themselves with fear and cruelty. The drought was coming regardless. Their treatment of you was a choice." Eleanor nodded slowly. "And now they're gone. All of them." She thought of Sheriff Mills, of Reverend Porter, of young Bradley with his taunting voice, displaced, suffering, searching for new homes, not unlike herself in a bitter irony. "Does it bring you peace?" Maka asked, watching her carefully. Eleanor considered the question. "Not peace," she said finally, "but perhaps closure. Their chapter in my life is truly finished now." That night, in the privacy of her dwelling, Eleanor removed Thomas's wedding ring from her finger for the first time since his death. She studied the simple gold band that had grown loose during her captivity, remembering the good man who had placed it there with promises of love and respect. "I hope you understand, Thomas," she whispered. "I'm not replacing you, just continuing the journey." She wrapped the ring carefully in a scrap of cloth, tucking it into the small wooden box that held her few remaining possessions from her former life. Tomorrow, she would begin anew. Not by forgetting the past, but by carrying it forward into a future she had never imagined possible. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the desert air sharp with the promise of the coming winter. Eleanor emerged from Kiona's dwelling, where she had spent the night in accordance with tradition, her tall frame adorned in the beautiful garment the women had created. Her hair, grown long during her months with the tribe, had been woven with beads and feathers that caught the morning light. The entire tribe had gathered in a wide circle at the center of the camp. Children scattered juniper branches and sage leaves on the ground, filling the air with their cleansing scent. The elders took their places at the eastern point of the circle, drums and rattles ready in their weathered hands. Eleanor stood at the southern edge, her heart steady despite the significance of the moment. Across the circle, Maka emerged from his brother's dwelling, dressed in ceremonial buckskins with symbols of protection and strength painted on his chest. Their eyes met across the space, and in that connection, Eleanor felt a certainty that transcended the trauma of her past and the uncertainty of their future. Nantai began the ceremony with words in Apache that Eleanor now understood, a prayer to the four directions, to the spirits of ancestors, to the Creator who had brought these two souls together against all odds. The drums began a heartbeat rhythm, slow and hypnotic, as Eleanor took her first steps into the circle. With each deliberate stride, she felt the presence of everyone who had shaped her journey. Her parents, who had loved her despite her difference, Thomas, who had cherished her strength, even the people of Copper Creek, whose cruelty had ultimately led her to this place and this man. Maka moved toward her with equal purpose, his steps matching the drum rhythm perfectly. They met at the center of the circle, where Nantai draped the ceremonial blanket over both their shoulders, binding them together. "Two paths now become one," the elder intoned in English, acknowledging Eleanor's heritage. "Not erased, but joined. Two strengths combined, not diminished." Eleanor looked up at the vast blue sky, then down into Maka's steady gaze. In his eyes, she saw not the giant widow, not the spectacle, not the aberration, but simply Eleanor, exactly as she was meant to be. "I choose this path," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent gathering. "I choose this man, this people, this life." Maka's hand found hers beneath the blanket, strong fingers interlacing with her own. "And I choose you," he replied, "in your fullness, your strength, your difference, as you are, as you have been, as you will become." Nantai completed the ceremony by binding their wrists with a cord of woven horsehair, strong yet flexible, like the bond they pledged to each other. As the final knot was tied, the tribe erupted in jubilant calls, drums quickening to a celebratory rhythm. Children darted forward to scatter dried wildflower petals over the couple. The feast that followed lasted well into the night, with dancing and storytelling and gifts exchanged. Eleanor, no longer required to make herself small in any sense, danced with her new husband under the stars, her height allowing her to see above the crowd to the mountains beyond, mountains she now called home. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Maka led Eleanor to a new dwelling on the eastern edge of the camp. It was larger than the others, with a raised entrance that would accommodate Eleanor's height without stooping. Inside, she found a blend of Apache craftsmanship and thoughtful adaptations for her comfort, a bed sized for her frame, storage at a height she could reach without bending, cooking implements modified for her larger hands. "You've been planning this for some time," she observed, touched by the care evident in every detail. "Since the day you agreed to stay," Maka admitted. "I wanted you to have a home worthy of you, whether or not you chose to share it with me." Eleanor turned to him, this man who had seen her value when she was at her lowest and who now stood beside her in her strength. "I spent so many years trying to fit into spaces made for others," she said softly, "learning to duck through doorways, to fold myself smaller, to apologize for the room I occupied in the world." Maka took her hands in his. "And now?" "Now I stand tall," Eleanor said simply, "because you helped me remember how." As winter settled over the desert and the first snow dusted the distant peaks, Eleanor Blackwood, once the giant widow of Copper Creek, now a respected member of the Apache tribe and beloved wife of Maka, looked toward the future with clear eyes. The journey had been unimaginably hard, marked by loss and cruelty and pain. But standing in the doorway of the home they had built together, watching her husband teach hunting skills to the boys of the tribe, Eleanor understood that some paths, no matter how difficult, lead exactly where we are meant to be. She no longer needed to apologize for her existence, to make herself smaller for the comfort of others, to hide the strength that had carried her through the darkest days of the cage. Here, she could reach her full height in body and in spirit, and find herself not a curiosity, not an abomination, but simply and profoundly home.